Hey, what's up everybody, Nexil here. Today we're playing Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and we're going to be talking about the new Supernova Plus illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Roxas, Lee, and Xion medals that just dropped yesterday in Global. Now this might be kind of a long video, and I do have a lot of thoughts on these medals, so if you want to read these notes instead of watching this video, go ahead and head over to my Discord where I post all my banner analyses under the banner analysis tab under a Word document, and then I also have all my medal templates available under the medal info tab. But for now, let's go ahead talk about the banners, the medals, the draw odds, and finally my thoughts and recommendations on whether or not I think you should be pulling from any of these banners. Now, first things first, with any new banner, we want to see how long we have to decide if we want to pull. So remember, it's always best to wait till the last day, again, see everything that's available to you, and then decide what you want to pull on. In this case, we have until October 7th to decide if we want to pull for any of these medals, and keep in mind that October 7th is also the final day for the Strelitzia campaign, and then I believe they'll be distributing the medals October 9th. But the 7th is the last day to collect medals that can get you the Strelitzia, meaning that this is likely going to be the final banner we get until October 7th. Just a thought, not a guarantee, so just keep that in mind. Next thing is the cost. So how much is each pull going to cost you? So this is a falling price deal, meaning that every single pull you do up until the 5th pull gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and that's always a good thing to have cheap banners. So that 5th pull onwards is going to cost you 1,900 jewels as opposed to our standard banner where it costs you 3,000 jewels per pull. So that's a very good deal because you get the same amount of medals for a cheaper cost, which is always good. Now, in terms of the medals that are given, you are given 9 Supernova Plus or higher medals. This is still really, really good. Now, the trade-off is that there are certain medals you can't get, and they're all on the screen right now. So for some reason, you can't get Supernova Plus Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion A, and you can't get any of the Renova medals. But the fact that you get 9 Supernova Plus medals or higher is really good because, one, even if you don't want all of them, if you don't need any of them, you could sell them for draw points. And Supernovas at the minimum are tier 8. So every single medal you get, at minimum, if you sell it, you're getting 8 draw points, which gives you more points to pull from the draw points deal, which gives you a boosted Supernova medal, which is just good deal in general. Now, moving on to the other things that make this really good is that it's sub-slot material. Remember that sub-slots increase your multiplier, and multipliers are one of the best things you can do in this game in order to make yourself better. So whenever we talk about Keyblades, we always say get your Keyblades up to level 35. The reason behind that is because this multiplier stays the same no matter what happens in this game. New medals come out, new bosses come out, but no matter what, your Keyblade multiplier is always going to be there for you. It never fluctuates. It only goes higher if you get better subslots. So it's awesome to get 9 Supernova Plus or higher medals because it's draw points, it's subslots, and not only that, but these are Supernova Plus or higher medals, meaning that to some extent you could probably use them even without traits because they have good buffing, they are great for PvP, so there's a lot of great reasons to love getting 9 Supernova Plus or higher medals in this banner with every single pull. In terms of other things you get 1 trait medal. Let's go ahead and sneak back up here. You get 1 trait medal for the banner you're pulling from. So if I pull from the Lee banner, I'm getting Lee traits. If I pull from the Roxas banner, I get Roxas traits. And if I pull from the Xion banner, I get Xion traits. You also get 10 VIP coins with every single pull, which is pretty sweet because, again, these banners are cheaper than our standard 3,000 jewels per pull banner. And that means you're getting these VIP coins also for cheap. Now, when it comes to talking about VIP coins, remember that the Renova for upright medals, the Terra Ventus and Aqua combination Renova medal, is only available with VIP coins. There is no other way you can get this medal. So having cheap VIP coins and being able to put them towards a super powerful medal like Supernova Plus, I believe it's just Terra Ventus and Aqua, is a really good deal. Now, going back to the banners, you do not get any gems with every single pull. So normally we get 3 gems of an attribute, but this time around, because of the 5th anniversary, we're actually getting 1 Sora and Moogle B medal with every single pull. Now, we will be doing a video about Sora and Moogle B in a later video, but just know that this is a good way to compensate if you missed out on things like ranking high, you missed out on an event, you didn't complete an event, and you're shy just a few Sora and Moogle Bs. It's really good to be able to farm them through these banners. Now, finally, in terms of the banners, in terms of Mercy, you're gonna have a 10 pull mercy. That means at most, you are guaranteeing yourself a copy of the medal within 20,400 joules. Now that is kind of expensive in comparison to our 5 pull mercy, 3,000 joules a piece. But remember, you're getting a lot of supernova medals along the way, which are again good for subslots. They are good for draw points, and you can potentially use them as just buffer utility. So really, really good banner format. I still stand by the idea that this is the best banner format that we have ever gotten. And if they go back to the old banner style after anniversary is over, completely understand. This is an amazing banner format. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the medals. With the first thing that I noted, none of them are reversed. So unfortunately, they were not the reverse medals that we were hoping for. But what this means is that we are lacking reverse medals. They can essentially put more reverse medals in the shop, and we'd have to pull for them because newer players or people that haven't been around for a long time won't really have an answer to some of the hardest enemies that require you hit them with reverse medals. So for example, if we go to the quests and we look at the Keyblade War, one of the bosses in the Keyblade War is Era. Now, the thing about Era is that you cannot hit him with upright medals, otherwise they just get reflected back. The other bosses that have this particular effect, and again, they're all generally pretty hard. I believe there's a Gummy Golem that is reflecting all upright attacks, and then we also have the Leviathan, the Final Fantasy crossover boss, which is very, very hard, and again, you can only hit it with reverse medals. So the fact that none of these medals are reversed means that they could potentially charge us some more for reverse medals that we might need in order to clear some of those harder events. Now, for this particular video, before we talk about the medals, I will be putting my thoughts about each medal within their description. So if I'm talking about Roxas, I also put all my thoughts about Roxas in that same section of the video because I have a lot of thoughts on the Lee and I have a lot of thoughts on the Xion. So let's go ahead and start with Supernova Plus Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Roxas. So Roxas is unfortunately the most underwhelming of the three, and one of the most underwhelming actually of the entire set of Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medals that have come out. So Roxas is upright speed, he is tier 10 with a base strength before chips of 45,494. So going back to this standard of having a strength greater than 50,000 after applying chips. He has a base defense of 16,739, a multiplier of 20.8, which is nothing particularly special. Remember that on certain medals, if you have mastery on them, they get a higher effective multiplier when you're doing super effective damage. So in Roxas's case, you want to use him against magic enemies. That's when you're going to be squeezing out the most amount of damage. Now, when we compare this to Ventus, Ventus does have mastery with his special attack. Now, remember that mastery, based on the data that Roboloid and Ryugasen gave us, does 20% more damage against the enemy if the medal is super effective against it. So for example, if we're fighting a magic enemy and then we are using Roxas has that 20.8 multiplier, that's it. Now when we look at Ventus with his mastery, sure, he's got a 20.6 multiplier, which is weaker than the Roxas, but after you apply mastery, we're looking at a multiplier of about 24.98, which is higher than the Roxas. So likely you're better off using Ventus than you are using Roxas. Now, going back to the Roxas medal, he has a gauge cost of 3, which is that nice sweet spot where you don't need an attack boost max gauge reduction skill. You can get away with just a regular attack boost max skill on this medal. Even if you have extra attack on Roxas, you're only spending 6 gauges, which can easily be recovered with something like a Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine with extra attack or a Kingdom Hearts 3 Kyrie A. And remember that Kingdom Hearts 3 Kyrie A is always available at all points of this game if you pull for 3 times on this beginner's deal. Now, going back to Roxas and looking at his special attack, so it is going to be for 2 turns, buffs and debuffs. It is self-buffing, and that means he takes care of your general, upright, and speed buffs and debuffs, which is really good that a medal takes care of its own buffs and debuffs. In terms of the base strength increase, he gives all speed medals plus 6,000 strength, but again, this is for 2 turns, and that means it stacks, coming that second turn. So if you activate this on 1 turn, going into the next turn, if you activate him again, it's going to be plus 12,000 strength on turn 2. Now this is a little bit higher than our 1-turn buffs that normally have about 10,000. So you get plus 12,000, but it takes it all the way until the 2nd turn in order to get there. With extra attack, actually, on that 2nd turn, you're looking at plus 24,000, which is greater than the other medals that only give the 1k, or I'm sorry, the 10k for the 1 turn. In terms of the special attack bonus, he gives plus 220%, which is not special because we rely on Supernova attacks to give us plus 320%. And in terms of effects, really not a lot going on. He does count plus 2, which is kind of strange because he's a damaging medal, but he gets count plus 2. Count plus 2 is normally only given to things that heal, or like heal buffers or Kyries or Namines, certain medals like that. So he's a damaging medal that gives count plus 2, which is just kind of strange. Nothing crazy, nothing absurd, but it's just something interesting. He also does Ignoring Attribute, which is again great for PvE and raids. It's really good for raids because certain bosses have multiple parts, multiple limbs that are all different attributes. Being able to ignore attribute means that you are always hitting for super effective damage regardless of what attribute the enemy is, and that means you're cranking out the maximum amount of damage, which makes it really good for raids and really solid for PvP. Or I'm sorry, PvE. In terms of the Supernova attack for buffs and debuffs, this one is going to be 1 turn as opposed to his special attack that buffs for 2 turns. So the Supernova attack is also self-buffing, meaning that it takes care of your general, upright, and speed buffs and debuffs. It also gives all medals plus 12,000 strength, which is our standard now for Supernova attacks. But remember, it only applies to speed medals. We'll get back to this a little bit later with Lee and Xion. And then the Supernova attack also gives special attack bonus plus 320%. I didn't mention this earlier, but remember, for special attack bonus, the highest number is the one that goes through. So even if the special attack gives 220%, if you activate a Supernova attack that gives 320%, the 320% takes over the 220%. It does not stack. Otherwise, that would be absolutely insane. Looking at the Supernova attack one more time, it triggers before slot 1 is activated, and that's good for a medal like this because it means you get all your upright, your general, and your speed buffs and debuffs before you start activating all your other medals, making sure that you're essentially prepped for the whole turn. Now, in terms of my thoughts, Roxas is okay. He's definitely not as good as the illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Sora that just came out, so let's go ahead and take a look at the Sora medal. So what makes Sora so much better than Roxas is that Sora, although his multiplier can vary and can actually be kind of weak, it's a pretty easy condition having higher HP. If you start with a heal buffer every turn, you're always at maximum HP for the most part. Not only that, but Sora's buff package is a lot better, being able to take care of power and magic as well. And then Sora just has PvP utility, and that alone makes him good in PvE, PvP, and raids, as opposed to Roxas, who's mainly going to be for PvE and raids. So Sora just has more versatility, more things going on with him, and that's why I think the Sora is actually a lot better than the Roxas that we have right now. Now, a lot of people have been saying that 2-turn buffs are super strong, and that was true. It previously was true, and that's because when we look at the previous set of 2-turn buffers, or at least the first set of 2-turn buffers like Kingdom Hearts 3 Elsa, what made those so good is that at the time, a standard Supernova gave you plus 3,000 strength, whereas a 2-turn buffer would give you plus 2,500 strength. Now, by that 2nd turn, you'd be at plus 5,000 strength as opposed to the 3,000 strength that the 1-turn buff would do. So the reason that 2-turn buffers aren't as good anymore is because the percent of strength more that you get from the 2-turn buffer is pretty negligible. So think about the first set of 2-turn buffers. The Elsa would give you plus 5,000 by the 2nd turn, whereas any regular one would give you plus 3,000. That's a pretty sizable increase. It's almost double the amount of strength that you'd be getting. Almost. Now, when we look at these new 2-turn buffers, at the 2nd turn, we're looking at plus 12,000 metal strength, or plus 12,000 speed metal strength specifically with Roxas. When we have Supernova attacks, or I'm sorry, special attacks that give you plus 10,000, that's only a 20% increase. So because that percent increase is less with the newer medals, 2-turn buffers just aren't as good as they used to be. So that's it for Roxas. Let's go ahead and move over into the next medal. Let's go here. Alright, so next medal on the list is going to be Supernova Plus Plus Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Lee, who is a very interesting medal because he's sort of like two medals actually rolled into one, but we will talk about each one separately. So Lee has pretty much two effects. The first one is going to be where he is a damaging medal, and this occurs when he is on the first, second, or third slot of the Keyblade, or if he is being copied by a copy medal. So let's go ahead and show you this on our Keyblade setup. Alright, so let's go ahead and just borrow the Dark Knot for the time being, and let's clear all of this. And let's grab a Lee. Or an Axel. We'll have to use Axel for the time being just because it's pretty much the closest artwork. That's really why I'm choosing this one. Alright, so if we look at the Prime Axel, which is going to substitute for the Lee for now. So in the first, second, or third slot, the Lee is going to activate a damaging attack. Now, in the fourth, the fifth, or the sixth slot, which is the pet slot or the friend slot, he acts as a copy medal that copies 2 turns backwards. Now, we did have a copy medal that did this effect particularly, and it's going to be the Patchwork Animals. So this is going to copy the same medal as 3 medals back, but just keep in mind, we'll talk about the copying a little bit later. For now, let's go ahead and talk about what happens when Lee is on those first 3 slots. So Supernova Plus Plus Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Lee is going to be an upright power medal. He is tier 10, and he has a base strength of 45,831, which is actually pretty significant because when we look at previous copy medals, so things like the Reaper, Kingdom Hearts 3 Ansem the Wise, Rage Form Sora, copy medals tend to have a lower than average strength because of their versatility. Now, Supernova Plus Plus Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Lee / Axel has about the same amount of strength as a damaging medal would normally have. So this is actually pretty significant because copy medals used to be like 2,000 strength lower than the standard. Lee is right on the standard, and that makes him pretty good as a copy medal. Now, going back again to Kingdom Hearts 3 Lee / Axel, he has a base strength of 45,831. Again, after chips, we're looking at above 50,000 strength. He's got a base defense of 16,690, a multiplier of 20.2, which has pretty much been the standard for almost all Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medals. He's got a gauge cost of 3, which again is good because he doesn't need to have attack boost max SP gauge reduction in order to work really well, just like what we talked about with the Roxas. Now, let's go ahead to his first special attack, again, the damaging special attack, when he is in that first, second, or third slot. So, when he is in that first, second, or third slot, and again, we showed you the Keyblade placement, he is going to do 2 hits. In terms of buffs and debuffs, it's going to do for 1 turn, general, upright, and PSM self-buffing. This is a pretty unique toolbox because he does damage and then also preps for the rest of the Keyblade as long as you don't have reverse medals. Now, normally we sort of see this only with things like Kyrie medals or with certain heal buffers, so to have it on a damaging medal and a power version is pretty sweet. It's a nice little utility to have. In terms of other buffs and debuffs, he will give all medals after his activation plus 10,000 strength. And that's good because it applies to all medals. Remember, all medals means that it doesn't matter if the medals afterwards are upright, reverse, power, speed, magic, doesn't matter. Lee is going to take care of it. And again, that makes him very versatile in terms of just using him as a buffer. Now, when we think about where is this going to be useful, so remember that in some quests, you are locked to using a certain Keyblade, and those are usually like Proud Mode quests or some of the harder quests. So if we look at like the Bad Guy Breaker, for example, the first slot is going to be power. You could put Lee / Axel here for damage and to set up the rest of the medals afterwards, because again, he gives all medals that strength. In terms of buffs and debuffs for 1 turn, again, it's special attack bonus plus 220%, which we've already said is not particularly relevant. Now, in terms of effects, this is where he kind of falls short. If you activate his damaging special attack, which is again the first, second, or third slot, it does nothing else. No count increase, no gauge healing, no defense boost piercing, nothing. So that means those 2 hits do affect count, but that's okay because doing 2 hits that affect count, that's not too bad. It's -1 with a red counter, -2 with a blue counter. It's not like the TVA medal that does -7, which is a huge amount of count to be losing there. Now let's go ahead and talk about when he is in the 4th, 5th, pet, or friend slot where he starts to act like a copy medal. So he copies 3 metals back, which if we look at this nice little Keyblade chart in the top right, you can see exactly which metal Lee is copying. Now, remember, we've had this with the patchwork animals, and it's pretty useful, to be honest. If he does act as a copy metal, though, you do not get the all metals plus 10,000 strength buff. So let's go ahead and take a look at the previous Lee/Axel. So that all metals plus 10,000 does not exist if you use his copy attack. It's still going to be useful in Keyblades because that means you can put him in the friend slot and copy a metal 3 metals back, or he can be used in the friend slot again, being able to copy 3 metals back. So for example, let's go ahead and take a look at some setups where this might be particularly useful. So if we go to the Fairy Stars, for example, we can put the Lee/Axel in the pet slot, and then we'd get this activation of Kyrie twice, and this Kyrie's pretty good. So again, one of the best things about copy metals is that you get an effect multiple times. So we would be getting the ignoring targets attribute. We'd be getting that metal strength plus 10,000. So this is still really good utility to have a copy metal like Lee/Axel. Another example would be, let's use the Stroke of Midnight. So if we look at the Stroke of Midnight, and let's say we're going into a PvP round where we are locked to using the Stroke of Midnight, you can have the Lee/Axel here, and it'd be copying this Kingdom Hearts 3 Vanitas, which is pretty much the best PvP metal in the game, somewhere along the lines of the Illustrated Sora as well. So having that backwards copy can be useful, and I certainly have used my patchwork animals a lot, just not as much as other copy metals. Now, one big thing to note, we talked about a little bit earlier, when you use a copy metal on Lee, then it does the regular damaging special attack. So let's go ahead and, for example, let's grab our Reaper. If we put Reaper in the 5th slot here, it will be copying the Lee/Axel, and it will activate the damaging special attack, that 2 turns, all metals plus 10,000 metal strength attack. Now, looking at the Supernova attack for the Lee, so it is going to be for buffs and debuffs, it's going to be 1 turn, general and upright self-buffing. This is pretty good because previous copy metals, they only gave plus 10, minus 10 in terms of upright only for buffs and debuffs. So for example, Kingdom Hearts 3 Ansem the Wise. Now remember that in this game, the hardest buffs to fill out generally tend to be the general strength and general defense. That's not as much of a problem as it was before, but to have it on the Supernova attack is pretty cool because again, it means you get those buffs when you need them. It is on-command buffing, and on-command buffing is always good. The Supernova attack also gives all metals plus 12,000 strength. Again, it plays into his ability as a copy metal. So let's just say he's in a mono Keyblade. So for example, let's say he is in the Sleeping Lion. If we go ahead and pull that up. So for Sleeping Lion, we want all speed metals, essentially. But if we put the Lee/Axel here, sure, he's a power metal, but he'd be copying a speed metal. Having all metals plus 12,000 strength on the Supernova attack means that, sure, even if he's not in a power setup, all the metals are still going to benefit from his Supernova attack. Again, making him a little bit more versatile than what we've seen in the past. His Supernova attack also gives special attack bonus plus 320%, and the effects is actually one of the best things about Supernova plus Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Lee/Axel. His Supernova attack ignores defense. Or I'm sorry, it breaks through defense boost, which is really, really strong because that means we can use him in PvE and PvP, and his ability as a copy metal can be useful in raids, so that just makes him really versatile and it makes him really interesting. Remember that defense boost piercing 100% is normally only given to the best PvP metals in the game. So if we go back to that the Stroke of Midnight setup, so even with this setup, the Lee/Axel is still going to give you that 100% defense boost piercing and give you the benefit of another activation of Supernova plus Kingdom Hearts 3 Vanitas, again making him pretty good for PvP. So what this means for Lee in terms of him as a whole package, he can make you have really creative setups, but you really have to be paying attention to where you're putting him and why you're putting him there because of how he works and how he can potentially be a copy metal and how he can be just a damaging metal. So remember that copy metals, even Lee in this case, can effectively prevent you from needing to spend more jewels. So going back to our example, I don't have 2 copies of Kingdom Hearts 3 Vanitas. However, with the Lee/Axel, in this particular setup, it's like I have 2 copies of Vanitas, which is pretty good. Right down to the defense boost piercing, which is pretty good. So copy metals can prevent you from needing to spend more jewels on additional metals, because that Lee can be copying a Vanitas, it could be copying a Kyrie, it could be copying a Sora. So copy metals, I stand by the idea that they're among the most broken metals in the game because they can save you jewels, whether you think about it too much or not. Now, Lee's strength being the standard means that if he copies a metal, like another Kingdom Hearts 3 illustrated metal, it's pretty much an exact copy. So remember what I said earlier, copy metals tend to get a lower than average strength. Lee's got a pretty average / high number of strength, so that's pretty good, because it means he's going to be cranking out quite a bit of damage. Remember that metals that copy 3 metals back are kind of tricky. And the reason I say that is because generally your first 2 metals are going to be setup metals. So if we go back to our example here, so let's just say we wanted to put Lee, and just as an example, we want to put him in the 4th slot. So let's go ahead and make a quick setup for that. So we want to put him in the 4th slot because let's just say it's a metal, or I'm sorry, it's a Keyblade like Fenrir, where the 4th slot is going to be reverse power. So if we put him there, he's going to be copying 3 metals back. Now remember, these first 2 metals, unless you are a veteran or unless you have a lot of metals, you've been playing for a long time or something, they're likely going to be buffer metals. They're likely going to be to help you set up for the rest of your Keyblade setup. Now, in a setup like this, that means the Lee / Axel is going to be copying this Namine. And remember that one of the things that copy metals copy, so if we go here, one of the things they copy is the multiplier. So if we look at this particular setup, he's going to be copying an 18.97 multiplier when we have metals that have like a 21 multiplier, a 20 multiplier. So in this case, it's not really ideal to have the Lee / Axel here. It would be the same idea here where he'd be copying 2 metals back. And again, this is generally for most newer players and beginners going to be a setup metal. So really for new players, this Lee / Axel is going to be best on the pet slot or the friend slot. So why this plays into the usefulness of Lee is that if you don't have other better metals, then really he's going to be copying a bunch of subpar metals. So for example, newer players, they are likely going to have a bunch of metals, Supernova plus metals, that don't have traits, because either they didn't buy VIP or they just joined recently, they didn't have any traits for the metal. And remember that traits are what brings a metal from A class tier to S class tier. So likely if you pull from the Lee / Axel banner, it might be the only metal that has traits in your entire setup. And remember, with the Lee / Axel, since it's going to have like good sets of traits, it's going to have a high strength, you're likely going to want to put it later in your Keyblade where your slot multipliers are the highest. So for example, at the beginning of the Fenrir, the slot multiplier for me is 8.34, as opposed to the pet slot where it's 10.14, which is a lot higher. So Lee, being my only traded metal, is likely going to go in the pet slot. But if I don't have anything for Lee to copy, then it's just going to be okay. So truthfully, I have to play around with the Lee in order to get a better grasp of what he does. If he fails to copy the metal and activates his regular special attack, then he's going to be pretty much good. He's pretty much a good metal, in my opinion. He can be versatile, he can give you what you need when you need it, but without having the ability to play with the metal first, it's hard for me to say certain things. He can just be kind of tricky. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. He can be tricky because if you're not copying the right metal, or if you don't put him in the right spot, it can actually hurt your setup overall. All right, let's move on to what is probably the most controversial, or at least the one that's being discussed the most, the illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion. Now, Xion is going to be an upright magic metal, tier 10, base strength of 45,770, so again above 50,000 after chips, base defense of 16,706, multiplier of 20.2, gauge cost of 3. We've talked about these with the past 2 metals. They are all decent and average things for a lot of the illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 metals. She does 3 hits. Now, this is where she gets interesting, the special attack. So in terms of buffs and debuffs, she's a perfect buffer. And we haven't used that term since Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine. Now, what a perfect buffer does is it pretty much buffs all of your attributes. So general, upright, reverse, power, speed, magic, you get all those buffs with this one metal. And again, it's a very rare ability to have. We've actually only seen it with specifically Namine and Xion. I believe there's no other metal that actually buffs all of your attributes. So this is a really good ability to have because it doesn't matter what Keyblade you're using. So let's just say you got really unlucky, you didn't get a Namine throughout all of your pulls during JP's 5th anniversary. You can use this Xion as your buffer no matter what Keyblade you're using. It doesn't matter if you're using Fenrir, it doesn't matter if you're using Missing Ache, it doesn't matter if you're using Fairy Stars. You can use Xion as your generic, sets up your entire Keyblade, and that is still good. Now we'll talk about her in relationship to Namine in just a little bit, but the big thing about Xion is that she buffs reverse metals, and that is something we don't see a lot with generic buffers, so it's really good to have another perfect buffer. In terms of the buffs and debuffs, again, they last for 1 turn, all metals plus 10,000 strength, and just like the Lee/Axel, this is really good because it doesn't matter what comes after her. Again, supporting her ability as a buffer, because no matter what comes after, it's gonna get a metal strength increase, which is really, really solid. It's not locked to power, speed, or magic, or upright, or reverse. General universal goodness. In terms of the special attack bonus, is plus 220%, and the effects is another great thing about Xion. So we talked about the all metal strength, we talked about the reverse buffs and debuffs. Her effects, it's literally every single healing you could possibly get in this game. So she gives you 5 gauges with every single activation. Now since it's 3 gauges to activate, you're effectively getting plus 2 gauges as long as you don't have a attack boost max SP gauge skill. If you have attack boost max SP gauge 0, for example, you actually just get 5 gauges back, which is really good. But keep in mind, with any metal that costs gauges, to restore gauges, you have to have that metal's initial cost. So let's just say you're at 2 gauges and you go into the Xion, you won't be able to activate the Xion and you won't be able to get that healing. You have to have, at minimum, 3 gauges in order to get those 5 gauges back. Just keep that in mind. But if you do have like attack boost max SP gauge 0, you're actually getting 10 gauges back as long as she has extra attack, and that's quite a hefty amount to get back. That's the same amount that Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine gives you when she has extra attack. The Xion also gives you HP healing to maximum, which is, again, something that's really good for healing because a lot of metals have that damage plus condition. You have to have higher HP. Being able to heal turn after turn after turn is one of the most vital things when it comes to gauntlet missions where you have to fight a lot of enemies. She also casts Esuna, which is pretty much, it removes all status ailments that you have. So poison, paralysis, sleep, I guess. I don't really know how she's going to get you out of sleep, but for poison and paralysis, being able to heal is really good. Being able to get that off of your character so that you can continue using your setups so that you can get knocked out and not need to worry about getting knocked out with poison is really good. And this is what a lot of the metals lately have been missing. So we've seen metals like Kingdom Hearts 3 Kairi. So for example, let's go ahead and pull her up. So she has healing to max, she has gauges plus 5, count plus 2, but not having the Esuna, which the Xion does. And again, it's a very rare ability that we normally only see with heal buffers. She also gives you count plus 2. So again, all this, the gauges, the HP healing, Esuna, count, these are all the possible healing buffs that the game has to offer, which is why some people say that she's a Namine replacement, but we'll get back to that in a second. So in terms of her Supernova attack, for buffs and debuffs, it is going to be for 3 turns, and this is new. This is not something we've ever seen with any metals. The buffs and debuffs are going to give you self-buffing for general, upright, and power speed magic. So unlike her special attack, it does not do reverse. However, very few Supernovas in general will give you so many attribute buffs. Not even Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine, if we take another look at her, her Supernova attack doesn't actually give you any attribute buffs. So that gives the Xion a little bit of a leg up on the Namine. So Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Kairi doesn't give you a lot, or doesn't give you as many attribute buffs. Or actually, I think it's the same. Hang on, let's go ahead and pull up the Kairi. I'm sorry, yeah, it's the same. So what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of metals in general don't give you so many buffs with the Supernova attack. And again, buffs with the Supernova attack are really good because that is buffing on command. If you get debuffed, if you get, for some reason, you get all your buffs removed or dispelled, you can just activate the Supernova attack of Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion and boom, you're back and you are ready to go. In terms of the Supernova attack, she'll also give you all metals plus 6,000 strength. Now, this isn't as big as other metals. Our standard nowadays is plus 12,000, but it does last 3 turns, and that 3-turn thing can be very interesting to use in certain events like PvP. In terms of effects of the Supernova attack, it's gauge healing +5 and count +5, and this can be really useful as much as it's underplayed, because this is on command. So let's say you're fighting an enemy, the count is at 2, and you've got a medal that hits for like 5, like a Renova or something like that, and you're fighting like a blue counter enemy, just for example. You can be like, alright, I can't hit it with my Renova special attack, because otherwise it's going to be count to 0, I'm going to get hit with some sort of crazy special attack that's going to knock me out. Oh wait, I have the Xion. I can just activate Xion Supernova, bring that count up by 5, I can activate my Renova, and then activate other medals down the line. So being able to get that gauge healing, that count healing on command can really help you in certain scenarios where you need to manage count, or where you are running out of gauges, like let's say you're using a reverse Keyblade, which doesn't really have a lot of gauges. So in terms of my thoughts about Xion, she's a much needed complement. Is she the greatest heal buffer that's ever existed? No, but she's a great complement. So like I said earlier, healing with special attack is significantly better than being able to heal with the Supernova. So if we look at, I don't know if I have her template pulled up. Here we go. So if we look at Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Kairi, she doesn't heal with the special attack, but she heals with the Supernova attack. But remember, you only get 1 Supernova activation per mission unless you have a Renova. Being able to heal every single turn is again great for those medals that require you have a higher HP in order to do more damage. Now the next thing to talk about, is Esuna on a medal really that important? So the big thing that Xion has that a lot of previous medals aside from like heal buffers have, that Esuna, is that so great? And I think it is. I think potentially Esuna is an amazing skill to have. So for example, when we think about some of these harder missions, like the Organization 13 mission, they will have an interrupt attack that smacks you in the middle of your turn and potentially hits you with a status ailment. So going to your 3rd medal, for example, getting smacked with poison or paralysis, and then potentially skipping more medals in your setup is not good. But if you can heal that in the middle of your setup, because you have something like Kingdom Hearts 3 Illustrated Xion, that's really good. It's great consistency, and it prevents you from needing to redo a mission all over again and hoping you get lucky and not get hit with the status ailment. So status ailments are generally only relevant with really difficult enemies, like those level 5,000, level 6,000 Keyblade War enemies. Those really difficult enemies are going to take advantage of status ailments, whereas the weaker enemies, big bonus challenges, certain other quests, those like mid-tier kind of quests in terms of difficulty, they don't really use status ailments, and that's why a lot of people don't really care about them. But if you've ever seen my post about it, I say whenever you get a resist 100% pet trait, you keep it, because those resists in those higher level quests, Keyblade War or the Organization Challenge, in those high level quests, those status ailments are the make and break between you consistently being able to beat those quests. The next thing about Xion is that 3-turn Supernova, which is, like I said earlier, great for PvP and gauntlet missions where you have to fight a lot of enemies. So you will not only get the plus 6,000 metal strength over the course of 3 turns, but you will also get the special attack bonus plus 320% for 3 turns. Now, when it comes to gauntlet missions or PvP, in certain cases, that's a Supernova attack you don't need to proc. So one of the big things about Supernova attack is going to be that 320% special attack bonus increase. And in a gauntlet mission where you essentially have 3 turns to beat an enemy, you can just activate the Xion, and then that's 320% for all 3 of those turns. Nothing can take that away. So that's really interesting. It's not fantastic, but it's interesting utility to be able to have. In PvP, it's pretty good because if you activate Xion on your first slot or on your first Keyblade, you will get that plus 6,000 metal strength across all 3 of the Keyblades. So if we go to PvP in the game right now, and I've very rarely seen there ever be more than 3 Keyblades in PvP. So if we look at our Keyblades and our PvP setups, if we have Xion in this first Keyblade, and then we activate our Supernova attack, that's 6,000 metal strength here, that's 6,000 metal strength here, that's 6,000 metal strength here, and then if you have Renovas on top of it, that could be upwards of like 18,000 metal strength here, and here, and here. And that's pretty interesting utility to have. Now let's go ahead and head back over to the Xion template. So the big question on everyone's mind is, does Xion replace Namine? And generally, no. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Namine template again. So one of the greatest things about Namine as a heal buffer is that she costs 0 gauges to activate. Now, we talked about it with the Xion. In order to get the healing, in order to get the gauge restoration, you have to be able to activate Xion first. You have to have those initial 3 gauges. But Namine having a 0 gauge cost means that she will activate no matter what. If your Keyblade has 0 gauges, you can activate Namine. Let's just say in the future, for some really odd reason, they have an enemy that strips away special attack gauges, giving you 0 attack gauges to work with, but it's like, oh, I might not be able to activate my Xion, but I can activate my Namine still. I can get those gauges back, that buffing back. So having a 0 gauge cost is really good to have for something that is essential for you to set up the rest of your entire Keyblade setup. Not only that, but Namine has no use for an attack boost max SP gauge reduction skill. So Namine with extra attack alone gives you plus 10 gauges, and she didn't need attack boost 13 max special gauge 0. In order to get the 10 gauges with Xion, you have to have attack boost max SP gauge 0 in order to gain as many gauges as you would normally get with Namine with extra attack. But if you use that skill on the Xion, that means you can't use second chance, and that means she's not as great as a heal buffer. For heal buffers, again, we expect to be able to put defense boost 5 max, defense boost 6 max, or second chance as their skill, and use them on every single Keyblade setup. So not being able to do that with Xion just makes her a little less versatile than the Namine in terms of being able to set you up. So if you do put second chance on Xion, let's just say for example, you're only getting 2 gauges per activation. Even with extra attack, that's only 4 gauges, and that's not really enough to maintain a setup. So people that haven't been playing for a long time likely don't have like 8 copies of attack boost 13 max SP gauge 0. They likely have attack boost 13 max, attack boost 12 max with paralysis, just not enough gauge reduction skills to be maintained on just 4 gauges in between turns alone. Now, Roboloid did bring up a good comment in my Discord. A lot of missions, you're pretty much fighting one enemy, and that's it. So for example, like the Organization 13 challenge, you're fighting just one enemy. And in that case, gauges don't matter as much because you're not fighting a ton of enemies over a long period of time. So in that case, it might be better to use a Xion. But really what I ask myself when I think about the Xion versus Namine debate that everyone's having, under what circumstances would I want to use a Xion over a Namine? And realistically, the only thing I could think of is when you need more damage. Xion gives you a greater metal strength increase. She has a higher multiplier, a higher general strength. So really, that's the only time I could think of wanting to use a Xion over Namine. If you have a perfect Namine right now, she's got the extra attack, all the resist skills on her, then there really isn't a need for the Xion. But, and here's where Xion gets crazy, she makes mono magic the most broken setup of them all. So let's go ahead and head over to my counterpoint where I can show you exactly why I think Xion really helps with magic setups specifically. So this is the particular setup I'm talking about where having the Xion is going to be absolutely amazing. So one of those special things about Xion is that she's got Esuna, the ability to remove status ailments from you, which was normally locked to heal buffers. Now with the Xion, across all these different magic Keyblades, you pretty much have everything you needed from the Namine. So in that case, you can just replace Namine with, or at least substitute her, with a Renova medal, which will give you all of the Supernovas back so that you can re-proc them. And that's really good. This is, again, one of the strongest setups in the game where you can have 2 to 3 Supernova Renew medals and not need to use a heal buffer because all the effects of that heal buffer are spread across the new Xion. You can get them from the Kyrie here. So you get all the gauge restoration, all the HP healing, all the status ailment removal, and you didn't need to use Namine. Now keep in mind this is with a lot of different medals, whereas Namine is rolled into one, which is really good utility. But this is a fantastic setup to be able to go into PvE with. Just imagine there's a second chance here, because I know there's an attack boost max, but just imagine it's a second chance. So in that case, this is a really good setup because Renova here. It buffs all the other metals, and it also lets you reproc all of the magic supernova attacks. Xion here, getting rid of any sort of status ailments we have or any sort of HP that's gone. And then we have Kyrie here for damage. Remember that she also gives metals strength, all metals, doesn't matter the attribute. And then we go into another Kyrie, which gives all metal strength anyways, and ignores attributes. So now we have a high damaging metal here, a high damaging metal here. Magic is an amazing setup with the illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 Xion because it fills in the gap that was normally needed to be filled in with the Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine or just a heal buffer in general. So this is pretty much going to be my greatest setup after I get the Xion, which is probably going to happen. We'll see. We'll see how it all works out. So with this, you now have a generic magic setup that can do massive damage to power, speed, and magic enemies. And I could pretty much use this for almost any mission as long as the enemy doesn't reflect magic. Now going back to the banners, let's go ahead and talk about the draw odds. With the two biggest things to know is that you can get any of the other two in the third banner. So for example, if we click on the Lee/Axel draw odds, you can have a chance to get a Roxas or a Xion when pulling for Lee/Axel. And this is really good because the more desired metals are in the pool of metals that you can get, the higher chance of you getting something that you want. So people that have said, oh, I've pulled like 10 illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 metals and I've only pulled like 15 times, that's awesome. You got a lot of good metals without having to spend a lot of different jewels. Remember, there's a 12.65% chance you will pull any illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 metal per pull. 1 out of every 10 people per pull is gonna get an illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medal, and those are amazing odds. Now, someone asked me if I'm specifically looking for the banner medal, so let's say I'm pulling for Roxas, what are my chances of getting Roxas per pull? 6.5% per pull. And even going further, there's a 45% chance you will get that medal before the Mercy. So that means about 50% of all players pulling from that banner will need to Mercy it, and that's a big take-home point because I've heard a lot of complaints saying this person got it before the Mercy, but I had to Mercy it all the way. It's 50% chance pretty much that you won't get it before the Mercy. So keep in mind with any banner, you have to at least have enough jewels to Mercy it. That's my rule. If you can't Mercy the medal, don't pull for it. That's the general rule that everyone really should be following. But looking at the draw odds one last time, you have a 70% chance by the 9th pull to have pulled an extra illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medal. And those are amazing odds. Again, this is a fantastic banner format, and it's not the common banner format that we see. So to wrap things up in this video, what are my final thoughts and recommendations about who should pull? It's hard to say, and it really depends on what you need. Technically, as long as you have Kingdom Hearts 3 Namine with extra attack, you really don't need to pull for anything. But will pulling benefit you? Yes, these are strong metals. The Lee is very interesting because it could be a copy medal or a damage medal. The Xion is interesting because she has Esuna and can make your magic setups absolutely broken. The Roxas, not so much. Yes, he'll get great value if you get him, but at the same time, he's nothing particularly strong or new or anything fantastic to talk about. So realistically, you should only pull if there is something that you need. Let's say you are lacking in upright magic damage, you can still get the Xion because you can still use the Xion as a damaging medal. Same thing with the Lee/Axel. Let's say you don't have a lot of fantastic power medals. Again, I'll have to play with the Axel more, so this one's still kind of TBD in terms of how to use him, but you can use that Axel as a damaging medal, or you can get a second effect off twice, like for PvP and that Vanitas. That can be really game-changing for you to win that PvP round. So it really depends on what you need. I still think that the strongest set of illustrated Kingdom Hearts 3 medals are going to be the Sora, Riku, and Kairi, which were just absolutely phenomenal in comparison to some of the ones that came out. So, who should pull? It really depends on what you need. In terms of sheer recommendation, the Lee and the Xion are definitely the most interesting, and they have the most potential to improve your setup, but they're not so crazy that you have to pull for them. So a lot of thoughts, a lot of recommendations, a lot of things to talk about. Again, I have to play with the Lee a little bit in order to get a solid understanding of how he works. He is a very new mechanic having that dual utility. So I might have to revise some of this analysis a little bit later. But with that being said, this is a 15-minute video. I almost recorded it for pretty much a whole hour. So that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, a lot of my banner analyses, if not all of them, are uploaded to my Discord. So if you're reaching the end of this 15-minute video and you're just like, oh my gosh, why did I sit through all of that? you can always read my notes. If you're a text reader instead of a listener, that form of education is available to you. So hopefully that helps some people that like to read more than they like to watch videos. But that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, if you want to join my Discord, it is right below the screen there. Just type that into your URL and you should be good to go. But that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, until next time, take it easy.